In this lecture, I will review common training methods that are used in organizations today. So if we think about the training process, which the training process includes the development of the training program, the implementation of the training program, and the evaluation of the training program's effectiveness, training methods fit in here. So after we have assessed the training needs via needs assessment, and after we have attempted to enhance learning in the learning context or the training context by considering and addressing trainee characteristics, the organizational context, and their interaction with the training content itself, then it is time to choose and administer an appropriate training method or even multiple training methods for the same training program. And ultimately, we'd go about then evaluating our training program's effectiveness in that final phase. So what we're going to focus on today is how we go about choosing and administering appropriate training methods, as well as what are some of the common training methods that are used today in organizations. So when I say training methods, I'm just referring to approaches to delivering training content and facilitating trainee learning. So it's important to remember that there is no one best way to train employees in terms of training methods. What we really have to consider when it comes to deciding what training method or multiple methods are going to be appropriate, we really should take into consideration the training goals and objectives and the cost relative to the benefits of using different types of training methods. So our decision on what training method to use is going to be very specific to the context, what we're trying to train, what we're trying to achieve, as well as the relative cost, our in-house talent, and our in-house resources, as well as what we expect the benefits to be. So what are some common training methods that we see in organizations today? Well, they are as follows, and this is just a smattering of the ones that you might see, but these are some of the most common ones. Now, the first one that I have listed here is on-the-job training, and this simply means that you're learning how to do the job while you're on the job. And so this often means that another employee is training a different employee on how to perform a certain aspect of their job or the basics of their job if it's part of the onboarding process. The next common training method that you'll see are lectures. So lectures are a very efficient way to deliver information and to train people when you have one lecturer or one trainer relative to many different people who might be in the audience, or in other words, the attendees or the trainees in this particular context. Simulators are also fairly common, and these can take many different forms. Perhaps one of the most classic examples is if you're training to be a pilot, you often do some type of flight simulator where the simulator is actually going to look like an actual cockpit of an airplane that you might be trying to train to actually fly yourself. And so all the dials and gauges and everything are going to look the same. And so what this will allow you to do is to practice something that would normally be high risk in terms of, and high consequence in terms of the cost, in terms of both financial cost if you were to make a mistake while flying the airplane in a real environment, or even worse if you were to make a mistake that resulted in a crash or something like that. Flight simulators are great tools, although they can be very expensive to gain access to purchase, and to gain time in. They are going to be much cheaper than the alternative if someone makes a mistake with an airplane and with an actual airplane on an actual runway or in the air. Now, another common training method is programmed instruction. And this has been around for a while, but the basic idea is that you have different modules and people can go through the modules at their own pace. And at the end of each training module, you're going to get some kind of quiz or self-assessment. And so this gives the trainee feedback along the way. And so this also allows people to learn at their own pace. And this can be a very efficient way for people to learn, especially allowing people to learn in a way that's going to be best for them. And so if they need to redo certain modules that they don't do well in terms of their self-assessments or their quizzes at the end, then they can go ahead and do that and do it on their own time, as opposed to having everybody else who already did a good score on that quiz and got good feedback. It allows those people to then move on to the next module. Now, another type of common training method is really a big umbrella term, which is e-learning, which simply means, in most cases, delivering content online or via the web or electronically in some way. And so this can really take the form of, you could have different types of simulations that could be delivered via e-learning. Lectures are commonly delivered via e-learning. There's different types, and you could do program instruction versus e-learning as well. And so this really illustrates that these different common training methods they're not going to be necessarily mutually exclusive with respect to one another. Some are, but some won't be. Now, another type of common training method that you might see, especially if you're trying to train more complex skills like interpersonal skills for salespeople or customer service representatives, you might see something or hear of something called behavior modeling training. And this is based on the approach where first you have someone observe someone in terms of engaging in a specific behavior or skill, and then that person tries it themselves, and they then practice that, and they receive feedback on that. And this really comes out of Bandura's social cognitive theory, which is sometimes called social learning theory. Now, we can also talk about different types of training approaches or different types of training specifically or that are specific to different topics and contexts. Now, one that comes to mind is diversity training, which is becoming more and more common in organizations in the United States today. And diversity training in general has been found to increase attitudes and improve behaviors that are related to diversity and inclusion and equity. So it has been found to be effective. And of course, it's going to vary in its effectiveness in terms of what specific types of training methods are used to deliver it and how closely aligned the organization's culture is with the training program itself, and so forth and so on. Now, another big bucket of a specific type of training context is manager and leader training. Now, you could use lectures for manager and leader training and some of the other training methods that I've already mentioned. But when we talk about manager and leader training, we often see some things that are more specific to manager and leader training that you don't always see or often see used outside of them. And these include things like case studies, where people review a case from their own organization or another organization, and then they work through the different types of decisions that they would have made or would make in this particular example. And then there's also role plays, where you actually act out certain types of behaviors. This can be useful for, let's say, training managers and leaders on how to give performance evaluations or reviews to their employees. There's also games and simulations. There's some really interesting management simulations out now, which randomly assign people to different roles in an organization. Let's say someone's going to be the chief executive officer, someone's going to be the chief information officer, the chief financial officer, fill out the C-suite in that way, and maybe some of the VP roles as well. And then they engage in a management simulation where they have to make certain decisions, they're awarded certain points or dollar values, and they can actually compete with other teams. We also see things like assessment centers, which are often used for management development and performance management contexts, and specifically around developing leaders. And they're very good, and the feedback that's provided with them can be good for training and development. And we also see of late too, more and more executive coaching opportunities as well. So these are opportunities for people that are maybe already at the top or close to the top of their organization. It allows them to get feedback from someone that in terms of the work that they get, which is not always readily available for people that are in that position in an organization. Now, another type or another specific topic or context is what we call onboarding. And onboarding is a type of training that we typically give people when they're first entering an organization as a newcomer. And often we're trying to socialize them into the organization. And so what this means is we often try to build up their role clarity so that they understand their job or their role more clearly. We also try to help them with their task mastery or their self-efficacy and their belief that they can actually do the work that they're supposed to do. And then finally, we also want to try to get them integrated into the organization through increasing their feelings of acceptance by coworkers, their managers, and other people in the organization. So this wraps up this brief lecture on training methods. Here's the source that I referenced earlier on one of the slides. And this concludes the lecture on training methods.